Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Rational Side podcast and our final episode for 2025. We've got two great topics for this week, which I feel have kind of defined the podcast this year. First, of course, is BE, which this podcast has been very critical of. We've discussed how it has wrecked the country's economy, the DA's challenges of it, and it's probably one of the topics which come up, if not the most, at least in the top 5 this year. The second topic, which will be segueing from that, is broadly about United States and South African foreign relations in the wake of the G20, but most notably to do with Trump's refugee policy and how, at least implicitly, the only refugees that the United States will be accepting are now Afrikaner refugees fleeing persecution in South Africa. But let's start with the topic that's completely at home, which is BE, and most notably that Minister of Trade and Industry, Parks Tau, has announced a 2-phase review of BE and its subordinate regulations. Not much has come out. This has been in the wake of the government saying they're going to double down on BE, saying they're going to refuse to compromise on BE, but now it seems like they're kind of compromising on BE. Starting with you, Martin, what do you think this means? Do you think they're actually seriously recognizing that BE is a threat, or is it just playing for time?
Yeah, look, I'm when it comes to BE, my view is I'll believe it when I see it. Even now, Paul Mashatile, the deputy president, is kind of running his mouth, and Ronald Lamoa are running their mouth saying that they won't compromise on anything. And what they have in mind when they say that is BE specifically. Mashatile was very explicit about that just a few weeks ago, saying that they're as committed as they ever are to the BE policy. And now Park Stow is kind of announcing these I don't know, this review at least. I'm I'm not gonna get excited about it. I think the fact that they're making the rhetorical concession, I think that's a win. I think the fact that the ANC elite is now at least willing to some degree to make a rhetorical concession, I think that's a good thing. But it's the same view that I have about the rule of law, for example. Every country on the planet says that they live by the rule of law, and when you actually go and look, you'll see that this is basically a lie. But I think that they accept the premise of the rule of law is in fact a good thing. So in that respect, I think this is good. This is something that was unthinkable 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that you're now
I think
hearing
we lost you
this.
there, Martin.
Did you?
Yeah. You're
Oh,
frozen,
am
not
I back?
perfectly still. Yeah, you're back
Am
now.
I okay? Cool. Yeah. So I think the rhetorical concession is good. I think it's definitely a change of demeanor, but I think the policy itself is gonna stay as is. If I had to take a bet now, I don't see the leverage. I don't see the the balance of forces having shifted in any notable respect that could lead to BE as a policy being revised. I think that the ANC has been receiving a lot of encouragement from domestic forces who should be against the ANC, but are now in its favor to say, do not concede anything. And I must say, good liberals, people that I've had a lot of respect for over many years, have been part of this. They have said that we cannot be seen to be giving the US anything that they want, including changing our BE policies. Liberals are saying this, classical liberals, I must say. So the ANC is getting a lot of support that it is not due whatsoever to keep BE as is, and it's a lone kind of um, uh, uh, let's say crusade by places like the Free Market Foundation, the IRR, Solidarity, AfriForum, who are very explicitly against BE. I mean, even one Dilese Global, one of the good kind of, I would say, free market-ish economists in South Africa, is kind of talking about how we actually have to now push for more inclusion and more policies like this, just to say, hey, we have to give it to the big man, the big orange man. So yeah, I'm skeptical about how sincere the review is, whether it will lead to any kind of policy change. But as far as the discourse is concerned, I'm very happy. I'm very glad that at least we're now talking about changing BEE, and I think that's going to be the next decade or so, maybe, unless reality quickly catches up and forces the government to change the policy, which could happen at any time. But I think if we're just assuming strong ANC, buttressed by its GNU partners, buttressed by civil society for a few more years, I think BE is going to basically stick around.
I think a good point there is I think a few years ago, the only people who you would have seen criticizing BE publicly would have been think tanks like Free Market Foundation, Institute of Race Relations, and even in some cases with some think tanks, it would have been like, no, BE is bad, but let's give the similar policy as an alternative. And I think now something where the discourse has improved is that we can more openly criticize. I'm seeing more businessmen criticizing it. We're seeing other think tanks criticizing it. I think, unfortunately, the legacy media, and when I say that, I mean News 24 and IOL, they're just doubling down. And in the past, they would have had journalists who would have been anti-BE. But I think that's probably one of the main topics that infuses all of our conversations, how the legacy media is not doing its job. David, are you as optimistic as Martin?
Is Martin optimistic?
I think.
Well, yeah. At least he said 10 years. That means there's some prospects of success. He didn't say never. Exactly. So yeah, that's Martin being optimistic, I think. Well, yeah. So to answer your question, I guess I'd be very surprised if the ANC willingly embraced a non-racial alternative to BEE, like what the Democratic Alliance is proposing. And I think it's good that the DA is proposing this economic inclusion for all bill. I think you might quibble as a free marketeer with some of the objectives, like they want to target the sustainable development goals, which I think are kind of social justice-y. And we know at the Free Market Foundation, economic freedom produces incredible dividends. If you just deregulate the market, cut down on the size of the government, and enforce the rule of law, then people will pursue their own objectives. And if you have sound money, then you will have prosperity. And all the countries that are more free, more prosperous. We know the story. But nevertheless, DA, I think, should be applauded here for this. And Matt Cuthbert, the head of policy, I think has done excellent work in putting this forward. But the question remains, will the ANC, its core alliance partner in the coalition, the Government of National Unity, will they actually even engage on this? I mean, I think Mashatile has been quoted as saying, yes, we'll look at it, and Ramaphosa as well. But, I think committing to look at something might be an appeasement strategy. It might just be a way of kicking the issue into touch. And the real test will be whether there are any substantive amendments. I mean, the thrust of Parks Towers amendments could just be, well, real BE hasn't been tried yet, and we need to double down, and we need to kind of just tweak some of the issues. I was speaking at a conference last week, and it was a big association in the financial professional services sector. And it was all about reflecting on 30 years of transformation. And I was kind of the fly in the ointment at the discussion, and I was on the panel with the BEE commissioner. And you could see a lot of the ideological dogma that underpins BEE was still very much in place. And I also thought, I mean, there was some interesting revelations coming from there, particularly from the commissioner. He seems to believe that white people can just walk into a bank anytime they want and get a big fat loan for the business that they're wanting to start, and that there's all sorts of generational wealth. I'm sure you two guys benefit from your trust fund that enables you to live a life of largesse and a free and easy life, which is something that I would dispute. But, definitely one of the messages that came through from this conference, at least, which had very high profile proponents of BE speaking, was, look, transformation is not an objective. It's a process. We're on this long journey. And I think it's very intentional. the framing of that, which is that actually it's not even really about balancing the demographic equilibriums. It's more than that. It's really driven by power, by ideology, and so it's not merely trying to achieve some kind of racial parity, for example. So, I mean, if you imagine that if the Employment Equity Act, in those recent amendments, if somehow you could actually socially engineer the whole of South Africa to accord with these targets, I still don't think that would satisfy the proponents of BEE. They would want more atonement, more a balancing of the scales of justice. So, I think, and that was a comment that came out of the panel, that language, which was, given the injustices of the past, we need to engineer society to be more equitable. And I pointed out to the commissioner when he said this, well, listen, like social engineering is not a good thing. That's what we had during apartheid, and that had all sorts of terrible consequences. But he didn't really seem to make that connection. So I think the whole ideological edifice of BEE needs to be tackled, and that's why I think we need to frame this as a binary. You either have free markets and individuals being able to freely contest the market, or you have some kind of collectivist racial equity-based program. And so I guess you could say maybe the DA's position is somewhere in the middle, maybe skewed towards our side. But yeah, so I think maybe when you approach this, it's kind of, you could think of it as, okay, well, during the collapse of the Soviet Union, like everybody knew that this was built on shaky foundations. I don't think many people could predict when it would collapse, but Glasnost and Perestroika, the kind of free speech and free markets, basically, that was introduced by Gorbachev, that was a kind of transitional period and almost papered over those fundamental contradictions, that the system was unsustainable. So I think maybe on a bullish reading of this is that the ANC might be trying to save face. They understand that the system is not really working, and this is like an off-ramp for them to kind of try and move away from BE. I think ultimately you have to look at it as whose interest does it serve, and it has served the current elite very well. It's enabled them to capture procurement systems and to also have a kind of a moral advantage. And as service delivery collapses, as other things start to go wrong, it's very tempting to go and point to the glories of the past, how you defeated the evils of the apartheid system as a way of deflecting from your current failures. So I think look at the incentives, like whose incentive is it to really abandon BE and whose incentive is it to keep BE? And I would say the incentives are still stacked towards keeping it. But I'm very encouraged to see the growing chorus of voices, Financial Times, The Economist, the World Bank, the Institute of Race Relations with their economic, what is it? The EED, Economic Opportunity for the Disadvantaged, Empowerment for the Disadvantaged. And so there is this movement, this crescendo. Sarkolich has been very active in court fighting back against BE. So I think there is a window of opportunity here, and obviously the Trump administration's critical gaze as well. So we need to keep the pressure up. Don't get complacent.
Yeah, and if I can just add, the Free Market Foundation of the Solidarity Research Institute recently, about 3 months ago, 2 months ago, published its our BEE report, our joint BEE report on the compliance costs of the direct compliance costs that BEE represents to the economy. So I would invite everyone to go and have a look at that. But that is the first exercise of its kind since BEE came into law several decades ago now. And I don't recall the exact figures. I wasn't working on the report myself, but it's something like between 1 to 3% of GDP growth that it costs us, and then you can translate that into job costs as well. In jobs lost, and that's also to the tune of I think about 100,000 a year, and that's significant. but it's also conservative. The whole report is premised on a conservative costing of BEE. It cannot, and it does not, and it cannot look at the biggest cost of BEE, which is opportunity cost, which is if there's a big business in London and they're looking to expand and they're going through the countries, and they see, oh, here's South Africa. What would we need to do to invest in South Africa? Oh, give up however 30% of our ownership structure in that country to some random person just because they look a certain way. They might just say, yeah, no, we're not doing South Africa. We will never know that determination was made in a London boardroom. So that is, in my view, the far bigger cost that BEE represents to our economy, and that is not factored in. So BEE costs us a lot more than what the joint FMF solidarity report says that it does. But that's a starting point, and we are now at that point where even our opponents are acknowledging, thank goodness, that there is a cost to BEE. It's not just this wonderful flowery measure of justice, and it's this imperative, and it's just great. Now our opponents are also saying, no, you're wrong. It's not that expensive, but of course there is a cost. Now, I think David, you noted that someone said. This is never going to be a costless exercise. Thank goodness that someone is now saying that. So now we can have a mature conversation as adults about, okay, so what is the cost? Is it worth the cost? We can have that conversation now, which just a few years ago wasn't possible. And I think the more you look at the current situation that South Africa is in, I know a lot of people are celebrating now. I don't understand, but a lot of people are celebrating, pretending like we've turned some kind of corner. I don't know where they're getting that. That's not what I see in the jobs numbers and in the growth numbers. But if you look at that situation, I think ultimately any rational, sensible person must conclude that the cost is not worth it. And then I'm the first to concede that there are benefits to BEE. Of course there are. The stated aim in the late 1980s, early 1990s of the intellectuals, not behind this BEE policy, but behind the idea of a concentrated affirmative action program in the new South Africa. Their stated aim was to create a black elite, to show the country that, hey, black people can also succeed, can also be wealthy, can also be in the upper echelons of society. BEE has succeeded. It worked. It did exactly that. We have fabulously rich black businessmen now, many of whom got there through, at least in part, offering some kind of good service to the community. Tokyo Sequale has, I think, Time Bank, isn't it? I mean, that's an interesting new kind of financial services sector coming up. I think the media house that owns ENCA is majority black owned. So in that respect, of course, it's worked. We can see that there are black people now and colored people and Indian descended people who can be part of the economic elite. So there are certain benefits, one could say, to BEE. But the cost, I think we must now agree, is outweighing those benefits. And we're not going to get rid of those benefits. Those businesses will stay around. But as David said, the only guaranteed thing that always works under all circumstances is a free market economy. And that's what we'll need to do.
Just to counter something which you definitely agree with me anyway, but to counter your thing that BE worked in some ways, we could even say that those people who did succeed, except for the ones who got there through corruption. So Ramaphosa, I will contest, I don't think he's a businessman. He got his positions by being given his positions in big companies. He didn't earn any
rent seeker, complete rent seeker.
Yes, exactly, complete rent seeker. I don't know enough about Tokyo Sequale to say that if he was completely honest or not. I know he's a former minister. That's always raised alarm bells for me. But that aside, I would say that BE has held back the majority of black people from being able to succeed in this country for the same reasons you said. It holds back investment. It holds back people being able to start companies. All these businesses who haven't been able to expand because they don't want to have to give a portion of their business away. And it's not to a black person that they're giving it away. There's always that implicit subtext that, no, you can't just give it to any black person. You have to give it to a connected cadre. And I know this because we have, I know a person who wants to start a radio station, and in order to get the license to have the radio station, he had to have a BE partner. So he said, okay, no, I have someone who can be my BE partner. And they said, no, we choose one for you. And they chose, a very black man, Iqbal Survey. So, and this is what happened. It is just an opportunity for elites to just to place their friends in power so they can all just benefit from graft. I don't think there's any actual upside to BE at all. I think that if there was, and I think that all the progress that was made for black people to be able to be uplifted at the end of apartheid was because apartheid ended. The restrictions were taken away, and then they were allowed to boost themselves. If anything, I think there'd be more black elites, more black rich people, more black entrepreneurs if BE wasn't holding back economic growth and foreign investment, that they would be that if the free market was able to thrive, and real winners would be able to rise to the top without all these regulations holding people back. I wanted to also. So yes, David.
Sorry, Nick. I mean, just getting back to this conference that I spoke at, these are the best and the brightest of our society, working in banks, in asset management firms, insurance companies, fund managers. So, these are people who need to be capable to do their jobs. This is not like a kind of a handout thing. And I said to the delegates, like, you are the creme de la creme. You are high-performing individuals, and you deserve to be in your roles. You don't need the government to force the hand of business. And I think that's one of the underlying fallacies, is that basically the argument for BE is that prejudice runs so deep within the private sector that it's only through some kind of legislative mechanism that you have to compel businesses to hire black people. And I think that that's just a completely flawed assumption. And I think it really is quite insidious, because it undermines the agency and the capability of black people to actually improve their own circumstances. And so it's almost like a kind of an abusive dynamic that it gets established. It's like, well, you better not criticize the politicians too much, because if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be in your well-paying job in the corporate sector. And I think that I mean, if I had to kind of flip the tables, like say if white people were a persecuted minority and there was some law that said you had to hire white people as 10% of your workforce, I mean, if that was me, I would reject that. I mean, I wouldn't want to work at a company that didn't want to have me there, or wanted to have me there for the wrong reasons, or hated me. I would want to work for somebody else. I would want to work on a voluntary basis with people who see the value that I bring, and who want to share that process of entrepreneurial profit seeking with me. So I think in terms of benefits and costs, the costs are huge and they're distributed throughout the economy, whereas the benefits are highly concentrated. And what was interesting at the conference was there was an economist, Duma Hubule, who's quite well known, quite a left-wing economist. And he was saying, well, why this obsession with ownership? Look at all the benefits that BE has brought in terms of skills development and supplier development and all those things. And those might be benefits to those recipients. Like if you're the beneficiary of some skills training program, yeah, sure. But I think, again, there's this assumption that none of this stuff would happen without the government ordering the private sector to do it. Like if you are a restaurateur, for example, you want to make sure that you attract customers, and how you do that is by having professional waitering staff and cooks who know how to prepare a meal. And so you're going to invest in training your staff, you're going to invest in your suppliers because you want to have the best ingredients. And that's just how markets work. You don't need the government dictating that. And the government doesn't really understand business and how costs are considered, how resources are allocated, how staffing decisions are made. Each business is kind of its own unique creature. And to have some kind of centralized framework that dictates what the color of the skin of your staff must be, or the complexion of the ownership, I think it really is naive to think that there's no cost associated with that.
Yeah, and if I can just add a note to that, that I think a lot of people don't realize is that this assumption that kind of white people in the economy just by force of habit hire other white people, that runs very deep in our political elite. So this is not kind of a kind of an aside. So I would recommend that kind of any law whizzes who listen to this episode read the minority judgment of Justice Fruneman and Justice Madlanga of Madlanga Commission fame in the insolvency practitioner's case. And you will find that in that minority judgment, which nonetheless reflects, I think, a far deeper view in the political elite, they basically say that, well, we all know that white insolvency practitioners will only tend to brief other white insolvency practitioners. And therefore, thus, we need this BE policy. The insolvency practitioner's case was about a BE type policy. Therefore, we do need this policy to effectively compel them to bring in black insolvency practitioners into their practices. And they said other silly things as well, like saying we need not motivate that this policy might fail or succeed. Of course, it will succeed. That is what the policy's intention is. It will work. There, it's in the law. So this is an idea that runs very, very deep, and I think it's a very unfortunate kind of. We've spoken about this before on the podcast about a reflective of a profound lack of confidence. Nicholas, you made the point, I think, in the context of immigration a few episodes ago, whereby there's just this fundamental lack of self-confidence, where people just think that if they're not succeeding in life, it means that there's something wrong with them. But in fact, it's a systemic issue, and in our view, it's a policy issue. So this is something that runs deep, and it's not just an irrational belief by some commentators, but something that you'll find at the very highest echelons of even the judiciary. Yeah, and that's also another example. I often, when these debates about race law flare up, I often make the point that, listen, our courts do not agree with News 24 and with these journalists who keep saying there is no race laws in South Africa. No, the courts are very clear about this. There are many race laws in South Africa, and they're very keen to justify them. So the insolvency practitioner's judgment is another key judgment in that respect from the Constitutional Court, that says that, yes, we have these policies. Yes, they are racially targeted. Yes, we are going to create racial disadvantages for certain people in our economy on the basis of their race. In order to create racial advantages for other people on the basis of their race. So yeah, just another point there about how race laws are fake news is itself a disinformation campaign.
I would posit that News 24 is fake news, especially when we have Ronald Lamola, the foreign minister, saying South Africa will not bow to US pressure to change its policies on race. And I wanted to talk about this because it also segues into our next topic, where I think that the reason this discourse has come to such a head is that the ANC has been used to, for decades, living in an echo chamber where it can just push out its very dogmatic views. And I think that anyone who's spent a lot of time around ANC officials and ANC politicians, they're not exactly reasonable people. They have their ideas where they're not widely read. They're not. The ones who are read in very particular racial, nationalistic, Marxist think pieces. They don't think past that. I think we see this in the policies where they just do not think about how, okay, this not only could be immoral, it could also be leading to the country falling apart. But I do think to a degree some of it's intentional. I think that I'm currently reading Why Nations Fail, which I know I'm very late to the party, but I that's because I knew its conclusions, and I just wanted. Now I'm just finally reading the context. But in it effectively discusses the difference between prosperous societies, which are pluralistic and it allows people to have skin in the game, and the governments have a where people can participate, and then it creates a system in which it develops a new technology and it develops wealth and all that. But South Africa leads
inclusive economies.
Inclusive, yes,
yeah.
Inclusive economies. The ANC really wants South Africa to be an extractive economy. It doesn't want it to be an inclusive economy. It doesn't want it to be pluralistic. The ANC doesn't like that we have the government of national unity. They want to be an absolutist ruler that's able to extract from the economy. Now, the problem is that they inherited a country that had a very powerful corporate hierarchy. That's something even though the apartheid government, I'm pretty sure, would have loved to have a very strong nationalized corporate sector, they failed to do so because prior to the apartheid government, the owners of the country were effectively the mining companies, for better or worse. And I think that, well, the mining companies have caused some lobbied for some bad policy positions. Like, they're the ones who got our electricity sector nationalized. They're also the ones that kind of hold us back from complete apocalypse because of how much influence they have. And the fact that, so, you mentioned earlier, Martin, how you don't understand how people have this positive outlook about South Africa's economy. It's very simple. Gold is an all-time high. That's it. That is literally all it is that we get... early 2000s, South Africa looked like it was doing well because there was a commodities boom. Our mining industry, which is being held back, I might add, it could be performing far better than it currently is. And even with being crippled and with its hands tied behind its back and probably lobotomized at the same time, it's still holding us above South Africa's head above water.
And one of those constraints is BE, actually.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say, yeah. Can you just imagine? And I know I'm going a little bit of a side here. Before, can you imagine how rich this country would be if we took our already prospering mining sector and stopped hemorrhaging, stopped holding it back? How many more people could employ? How many more businesses it could support? Because every mine effectively funds an entire town. And we haven't had any exploration for, I think, has it been like decades now, or is it just it's years, or it could even be over a decade? We are shutting down mines. I'm pretty sure that criminal syndicates are doing more mining in South Africa than legitimate businesses now.
Just to give you a sense of the decline in prospecting. Sorry to keep interrupting you, Nick.
Yeah, no, that's no problem.
But the global share of prospecting, like mining discovery, that South Africa had about 30 years ago was about 5% of the global share. It's now 0.8%. So less than 1%. So what does that tell you? It tells you that miners, even though they know that South Africa has one of the greatest mineral endowments in the world, they're not willing to stake capital and even looking for minerals here because they know that it's not really worth it to sink a shaft. There's been a big push towards, and also this is ESG requirements as well, which are kind of sit in parallel to BE, towards mine safety, all these things which incentivize open cast mining rather than deep shaft mining. And so all of these things have just added to the cost burden of doing business in this environment. And of course, as Martin will tell you, the fact that mineral rights were effectively nationalized, if you think of the Agri-SA case, that you have to apply to the state for permission to mine, and they want their pound of flesh, they want their connected cadres to be part of the equity agreement, then that creates another additional layer of disincentives, And so if you think of, if you're a mining company, you mentioned that these towns are being supported, like you are basically replacing the local municipality in terms of the provision of basic services, roads, electricity, water, and increasingly now power as well. So you have to absorb all of those costs. You also have all of your social and community commitments. They're called host communities. And so, you have to make sure that everybody in the community benefits as well. So, that creates quite a lot of headwinds. And, is it any surprise then that you see the big mining companies exiting this jurisdiction? And, that economist that I mentioned, Duma Hubule, he was on Sizwe Mpofu Walsh's show, and I was watching 5 minutes of it. He was saying, look, we've got this great mineral endowment. This belongs to the people of South Africa, and we should be benefiting from it. And you hear this narrative a lot. But actually, what we've done through putting all these requirements on business, we've actually squandered that endowment. This reminds me of a quote that Gwede Mantashe said when the first conflict with the Trump administration was breaking out. He said, well, they've imposed tariffs on us, and we're going to withhold our strategic minerals. Well, they're not his to withhold, because the mining companies are staking the capital and taking all the risk. But also, he's undermined South Africa's own strategic advantage by making it so difficult to mine in the first place. So actually, South Africa is in a unique position given the geopolitical context at the moment. I mean, China and the United States are fighting bitterly over strategic rare earths and rare minerals. So we should be using that as a bargaining chip. If you want to do that, you got to make it more favorable to mine in this country.
I think the disappointing thing is that South Africa has embraced a lot of the crackpot social justice, it's anti-mining, environmentalist, social development goals, all this stuff. But European economies and American economies and Australian, New Zealand, they can handle it to a degree because they're a developed economy already. They've built that foundation. Now they're collapsing that foundation because you can't have an economy where it is effectively almost illegal to actually generate money. Or to mine resources. But, I think just exactly as we're holding ourselves back. I also think there's just this arrogance, and that we can see this arrogance a lot, is that I genuinely think a lot of people in the ANC think that the South African military could take on the US military. I think that they are convinced that that's the case. And anecdotally, I saw some people in like some EFF and ANC uniform merchandise during one of the displays where they're firing when the ammunition is about to expire, so they fire it over False Bay, which I think, I hope no one's surfing there at the time of night. So it's just this like LMG, they're firing it over with some tracer rounds. It all looks really nice at night. And these guys were saying, fuck you, USA, we'll defeat you. We can destroy a thing. We are the most powerful military world. Are they serious? And I'm just like, it's just an LMG, dude. It's not that deep.
Just to remind viewers, there was just some official in the government or in the military when I think it was during Biden's administration, there was some talk about kind of some attack on Venezuela. I know that's kind of escalated recently, but some South African officials said that, well, if the US attacks Venezuela, the South African army will help defend Venezuela. Like, I was just struck by that. It's like, what are you even talking about? Like, I think on paper we're supposed to have 15 C-130 Hercules transport planes. I think maybe 2 of them are in operation. The rest are all kind of standing. It is very optimistic. So it's. I think we're going to get into that soon on the foreign policy thing. But there's just a large degree of delusions of grandeur that has infected the upper echelons of our government and our political elite, and it's getting worse now, given what's happening kind of between South Africa and the US. And it's actually just cringeworthy, especially given that it's being encouraged by some people who really should not be encouraging it.
Just before going into the serious matters, there was this game called Homefront that kind of connects to a big thing a lot of Americans have, which is this idea that these tiny little crackpot nations could actually invade them. And there's a lot of them with like North Korea. So Homefront's about North Korea taking over the United States. There's Red Dawn, which is Russians. I think there was a remake with China. There's a lot of this fiction about. And I can't wait until some Americans write some fiction about how South Africa is going to invade New York City, and it's going to have and they're going to impose BE in New York City. Well, with Mumdani, that might be the case. But I think that'll be. I'm looking forward to South Africa rising to its proper, its deserved place of international infamy. But as we close the BE topic and move on to foreign policy, I just wanted to read something that really, I think, highlights the ANC's dogma and the truth of its ideology, where the media legacy just doesn't understand this, where it's all out in public. And I think that ironically, as much as I do think, and we'll get into this, the Trump administration gets a lot wrong about South Africa, I think they understand the core of South Africa, of the ANC's ideology, much better than a lot of our domestic entities do. So this is a quote by ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbule. If you want to see white people running their numbers out of this country and to the United States, redistribute the land. And then this country will turn into rubble like Zimbabwe. So he says that. He's completely aware this is what's going to happen. And then this country will turn into rubble. That's a direct quote from him. Yet, and also he's upset at the DA for holding it back. And then he basically, and then when the interviewer asked if he believed land redistribution should not be pursued out of fear of the white minority leaving the country and becoming like rubble like Zimbabwe, he responded, no, it must be. So they're saying that they acknowledge that these policies will destroy the country. They don't care about success. They don't care about prosperity. And I think that's the problem. We're playing two different games here. We're playing soccer where you want to get the ball into the goalpost. They're trying to beat up the referee. Two different games. And that leans in because I think that into the next topic was I think that, I personally have problems with the idea that, because I think Trump is overblowing the idea that there's a white genocide in South Africa. We do not have, I think that the language he's using, I don't like people overusing the term genocide. I think it belittles the point. I think that it doesn't apply to, for example, Gaza, and it definitely does not apply to South Africa. But, and here's the case which I think that the legacy media doesn't get right, and a lot of our intelligentsia doesn't get right. There's still problems in South Africa, and there's still racial hatred, and there's still persecution and discrimination. And at least with a core radical group, I do think there is at least a little bit of a desire for white genocide. Luckily, I just don't think they're that powerful yet. And the problem is yet, because it could happen. If there was a doomsday coalition with the MK and EFF in, we know that they've been quite open about wanting to push the white settlers into the sea. So the main topic around this, but I think we're going to be discussing South African-US relations quite broadly, is that refugee quotas into America have been capped at 7,500, and most of them have been reserved for white Afrikaners fleeing persecution in South Africa. I think, Martin, I think we've kind of discussed a lot. I think it's a complicated issue, and I think we kind of on the same picture here that we don't like that there's misinformation involved, but at the same time, people are not seeing this for what it is that South Africa is a terrible country that needs to be pressurized.
Yeah, look, there's unfortunately this has become complicated when it really shouldn't be. So there's a reality here. This is the reality. There is racial persecution in South Africa by definition. Like, people want to have a debate about it, but just look at the definition of what persecution is. It is ill treatment or hostility against someone based on, take your pick, their ethnicity, their political views, their religion, etc. That is happening in South Africa, yes, aimed at white South Africans. I am not saying this is Nazi Germany. I'm not saying this is Kigali in 1949, 94. I'm not saying this is Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge are rounding people up. No. But there is persecution. Persecution has various degrees. In South Africa today, there is persecution. And the moment that there is persecution, the idea of a refugee status comes up. So do I think that it's right that the US has opened a door for racial minorities in South Africa to become refugees in the US? Yes, I do think that is a moral move. Do I like that they have closed the door to all other refugees? No, I think that is despicable. I think that is unnecessary. I think that this is a political game being played. But do Afrikaners and white English South Africans and other racial minorities hit the definitional criteria of being persecuted? Yes. They're not suffering. I'm not suffering. I'm a white South African. I am not suffering in South Africa. Am I being persecuted? Yes. At a very kind of low level of intensity, I am, of course. I'm not a victim. I don't care. I'm not going to become a refugee in the US. But there are other people who happen to share my skin color, that's all we have in common, who are being actively pushed out of their work, out of business. They're being denied water licenses, etc., 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 just because of how they look. So that is persecution. That is happening. And I think our legacy media, our mainstream media, our intelligentsia knows this. And what do? to ensure that the conversation doesn't happen, so that there's the facts, here's the disinformation. They create this beautiful, brilliant, big straw man called white genocide. And I will not accept that this is a narrative that comes from within the white community in South Africa. It is just false. AfriForum and Solidarity made 2 social media posts a decade ago where they alluded to something like white genocide. They never, ever, ever did it again. And in fact, they spent inordinate amounts of time and effort and money on saying that there is no white genocide in South Africa. Compare that to South Africa's press media, the mainstream media, not the podbros and the alternative media, the mainstream News 24, ENCA, EWN, City Press, that media. Compare it to them. Compare it to the EFF MK bots on X. They are talking about white genocide all the time. If you see white genocide is trending on Twitter, it is not Van der Merwe, it's not Duplessis, it is not the white community in this country, it's certainly not the Afrikaner community saying that there is a white genocide in South Africa. Yes, there are the Cooks, there's like 5 of them, they don't matter. But the white genocide narrative is a complete contrivance of the press media and I would say black supremacists. Why are they doing this? It's simple. They want to have a straw man that they can knock down. It's very easy to knock it down because, yes, there is no white genocide in South Africa. Of course, there isn't a white genocide in South Africa. So it's very easy to knock down that straw man, say, look, we've proven you wrong. There's nothing wrong. So shut up. Don't say that there's persecution. Shut up. Don't say there's race laws. Shut up. Don't say there's ill treatment in South Africa. That is what they're doing. And they're succeeding to a very large degree in doing that because every time I speak specifically to foreign media, I get these calls from foreign radio stations, foreign press. They want to talk to me about white genocide. And I always start by telling them, listen, you are playing into someone's game here. We should not be talking about this. There is no white genocide. Print that as your headline if you want. But this is what is in fact happening in South Africa. We have hundreds of race laws in this country that discriminate against and in favor of people on the basis of their race. We have open condonation and countenancing by the courts, by the president, by the deputy president, by the the current minister of foreign affairs, of racialized ill treatment of people in South Africa. So there is something happening that deserves attention, and the people fleeing that do qualify, I think, by any reasonable definition of refugees. But there is something that's not happening that's being presented as a kind of a political tool to knock down. And we need to be very aware that that is happening. And I am glad that Marco Rubio, someone I never really had a good impression of, but now he's swiftly being rehabilitated in my view. He is a voice of calm, collected reason because I think he can see, as the US Secretary of State, he can see that the president, who, like maybe some of us, are permanently online and we get dragged into these kind of Twitter wars and these narratives happening online. Donald Trump is one of us in that respect. Marco Rubio is less so, and I think Marco Rubio read the intelligence reports. The CIA is not telling anyone there's a white genocide in South Africa. So he laid it out in his statement about the G20. He laid it out. He said that, listen, South Africa is a country where there's people, there's a clear and open plan to dispossess people of property, in large part on the basis of their race, and the country has engaged in racialized engineering and large levels of corruption for many years. And Marco Rubio didn't mention the term white genocide once. So kudos to him. I hope he can convince President Trump to focus on the facts, which is real racial persecution, rather than this silly straw man, this red herring. I think I know I'm not a patriot for this, but the US is on the right side of this, has been this whole year. The way we broke protocol at the G20 was despicable, and now the press is complaining that America is breaking protocol by denying South Africa participation next year. We're tasting our own medicine. We wanted to break protocol on consensus. They're breaking protocol on attendance. So I hope Ronald Lamola and Ramaphosa are happy now, because there's consequences to bad behavior. And I'm sorry, but the US has been broadly 80% on the right side of this spat between South Africa and that country. And unfortunately, I think that we need to redefine patriotism back to what it was during apartheid, where the Progressive Federal Party, the South African press, did not reflexively say, "Oh no, Prime Minister Foster actually he's reading the riot act to the West by justifying apartheid." No, they took the West side against the backwards policies of South Africa. That was patriotic, and we should remind ourselves that that would be patriotic today as well.
I think a big part about this is that what you said. So many people are seeing the G20 and they're seeing Ramaphosa's responses as a victory for the country. We're seeing this in the media. We're seeing this in Business Day. I responded to a letter in The Citizen, which should be what they're saying they're publishing next week. And there's another one in Business Day. And it is this issue that and also I've had so many friends just sending me like messages from people saying, "Oh yeah, look, it's so funny. We stuck it to the orange man," and they think that we've won. I just want to say, like, how did we win? Like we're continuing to damage our relations with the most lucrative consumer market in the world, to the world's superpower. If we have a natural disaster, or if we get invaded, no one else in this world will reasonably be able to come help us. If China comes, they'll come in and they'll colonize us while they're helping us. If Russia has no capacity to do it, is Zimbabwe going to come bail us out? No, the only country in this world that could actually reasonably help us if we're invaded by Islamic State, which people conveniently forget it controls northern Mozambique. If we have a huge insurgency problem that isn't actually friendly to the government, I think fortunately for them, the terrorists in the country actually are working quite nicely with them, helping with the money laundering. But if it actually became a problem, we won't be able to ask the CIA for help. We won't be able to ask the FBI to come in to consult on these issues. We are separating ourselves from the true global liberal order, which isn't these random, useless organizations, because let's frankly, the G20 is stupid. It serves no real purpose. But we are divorcing ourselves from the muscle behind the international order, which is the United States, which is being able to benefit from their military, from their trade, from their ability to actually implement these policies with force. And I think that there is no victory here. I think that anyone who's actually paying attention, who doesn't have who hasn't been trained by, ironically, American media for the last 25 years to hate America, to think America's stupid, to not want to be an American idiot, to quote Green Day. I think that, but I don't think we can really blame America for that. I think a lot of countries are going to be self-critical. South Africa should be far more self-critical. And the problem is, I think that we've spent so much, I think the world just focuses on throwing shade at the United States, not realizing how much we rely on them. So yeah, sorry, David, I went on a little bit of a rant.
Yeah, just to respond to what you're saying, Nicholas, I mean, I think there's been this kind of reactive jingoism, like South Africa can do no wrong and we're just being bullied by Donald Trump because he's a bit mean towards us, and why is he doing this? But really, I think Martin makes this point as well. We should be having a lot more critical introspection. And I do think that the characterization of the genocide is very unfortunate because it does create that red herring and actually plays into the hands of many of these bad actors that are operating in South Africa. But just returning to the Rubio comments, I mean, I think that's just worth reading them out. So he says that South Africa emerged from the Cold War and from the fight against apartheid with good institutions, etc. And then he says, sadly, Mandela's successors have replaced reconciliation with redistributionist policies that discouraged investment and drove South Africa's most talented citizens abroad. And he doesn't say white people. I mean, there's been a broad exodus of highly skilled people from across different racial groups. And then he says racial quotas have crippled the private sector while corruption bankrupts the state. And, he also talks about, the government seems intent on enriching itself while the country's economy limps along. all while South Africans are subject to violence, discrimination, and land confiscation without compensation. So, I mean, I think those comments, that analysis, you would be very hard done by to dispute anything that is said there. You know, I think that is pretty straightforward analysis of what's happening in South Africa. And a lot of these are not just kind of fake news conjurings of the Secretary of State's imagination. You know, these are on the statute books of the South African government. So, you know, Martin, I think, has been very patiently documenting all of the race laws that exist in South Africa. And I think it's quite maddening that people either refuse to even acknowledge that the race laws exist, and when they do acknowledge them, in the next breath, they say that none of these are for the sake of justice. And Martin is very amusingly characterizes this as apartheid equals bad race law vibes, and then post-apartheid is good race law vibes. But they're still race laws, no matter what kind of vibes you attribute to them. And so I think just pointing out these facts is very important. And I think the other thing that's notable about Rubio's comments was, and their actions, is actually extending the invitation to Poland. And I've been writing about and speaking about Poland recently at that conference that I mentioned. I actually specifically mentioned Poland. Like, this is a country that has endured the very worst forms of collectivism. I mean, just in the 20th century, they were invaded by Nazi Germany, a terrible invasion. And with the assistance of the Soviet Union, by the way, and the complicity of the Soviet Union. And then later, when the Soviets switched sides to the Allies, they were invaded again. And you know, there were the pogroms against Jews there, obviously at Auschwitz. There was then, after the war, multiple decades of intense repression under communist Russia, and they emerged from the Cold War pretty bruised and battered. But they were able to harness the power of civil society to really move towards freedom under their kind of solidarity movement there. And yeah, since then they've been very busy instituting reforms. They're part of the EU. They're a free trader. They're a strong country with a kind of a proud national identity. But they're also a global country. They engage actively with global trade and are competitive as well. And, you know, they also have severe security concerns, unlike South Africa. So, you know, they still are dealing with the specter of Russian power on their in their neighborhood. So, and I mean, even 15 years ago when I was living in London, most of the construction workers there were Polish people. And, you know, you'd always see them kind of in the tube with their overalls on and splattered with paint or dust from the construction site. But now I read that a lot of Poles are returning from the UK back to Poland because there's more opportunity there. And incidentally, the GDP per capita in Poland has actually eclipsed that of the United Kingdom. So your average Pole is now wealthier than your average Brit. And I mean, that's quite astonishing if you think that the UK has been this global empire. The pound was once the international reserve currency. You know, they were a prosperous country. And, you know, it just shows you how important policy is. Post-war, they went in a very socialist direction and kind of strangled the economy, and then Thatcher brought it back, and kind of the Blairite revolution as well also introduced a lot of growth, but they've squandered that. So it shows you that these policy decisions really do matter, and freedom works, but also the opposite, constraining freedom, is hugely damaging. So I think we need to take this as a bit of a sobering moment. You know, the fact that Poland is being considered for the G20 is probably actually appropriate given the size of the economy and its influence in geopolitical affairs. And unfortunately, South Africa's influence is waning, and I think that harms all of us. So I think if you are truly patriotic, you would be criticizing this government's policy stance in terms of international affairs and in terms of domestic policy as well.
I think that is the problem, though. Is so many South Africans think that patriotism is just loyalty to the government, and not just loyalty to the government, loyalty to the ANC in particular. And that is the problem, because they're the things, as we've said ad nauseum, It's the ANC driving South Africa into destitution. I wanted to add something about Poland, just to further add some sobering moments of how, frankly, pathetic the post-apartheid regime has been. Is that Poland was effectively colonized. It wasn't just, I think people have this idea like, oh no, it was a part of the Soviet Union. No, it was a colony. It was a colony in which Russia and the Nazi Germany and then Russia. It was actually Russia, then Nazi Germany, then Russia again, because it was under the Tsarist Russia, and the Tsarist Russians, there's a reason that the Russian Revolution worked. It's because Tsarist Russia was so damn unpleasant that communism, at least for a little bit, was slightly better. That is how dreadful. They effectively had an entire slave. It was an entire slave country with some aristocrats at the top, and everyone else were effectively slaves. It's dreadful. It's fantasy level evil. And Poland was one of its colonies. So if you imagine how they're treating their own Russian citizens, imagine how they're going to treat foreign citizens under their control. Then we have them being starved to death and trampled on by the Germans and then the Russians again. They were a colony under the most brutal regimes this world has ever seen for centuries. And yet now they've become one of the most prosperous countries in the world. And they've produced world famous literature, world famous games. That's one of my big reference points for Poland. They're creating probably the military that will defend Europe from Russia again. And I think that it's such a nice thing that all these Polish citizens who left their country, but they didn't leave their country because they didn't like it. They left it so they could produce wealth to send back to their families, and then now they're going back. And I find that is something to envy. I think that there's a few countries in this world which I think that you can be genuinely patriotic for, genuinely nationalistic, without it having let's ignore some of the bad connotations with the word nationalistic. But I think it would be Poland, because they genuinely feel like they serve their citizens. They have something to aspire to greater than just some rhetoric. And I'd say Israel's the other, which will be the controversial one, because I do believe that Israel cares about its citizens and actually will do whatever it takes to defend its citizens, even if they're abroad, even if they're abandoned abroad. They literally snuck in planes into other countries to evacuate Jews and making them Israeli citizens. Can you imagine if South Africa did that? Can you imagine with all the Dubai keeps arresting and discriminating against South African tourists and in the UAE? Can you imagine if we actually say, hey, no, you can't just keep arresting our South African citizens. We're going to go there and we're going to save them. That would give us a reason to be patriotic.
Yeah, I think just one more thing to note on Poland, which it's staggering to think that now, but in 1995, GDP per capita between Poland and South Africa was virtually identical. Now think about that. Poland came through that horror show that Nicholas kind of referred to. Communism, fascism, communism, well, let's say feudalism, a brutal form of feudalism, then divided between communism and fascism, and then just communism for the better part of a century, where their compatriots in Cambodia and in Ukraine and in China suffered humanitarian disasters that I think are unparalleled by even the greatest genocides of human history. They were under the same ideology up until 1990, whereby they ended communism there. And I had the great privilege of being in Poland 2 or 3 years ago now. And if you walk around Warsaw, you will find monuments basically like you'll walk into an alleyway. It's not like a grand kind of monument, and there will be a monument against communism in the alley. Like that is how seriously the Poles kind of take signaling, good virtue signaling, their opposition to communism. And I went to the Warsaw Museum and the Victims of Communism Museum in Warsaw, and I spent a good day there. Very great selection there. But this is a country that decided after communism we're gonna tell ourselves that freedom is important, and we're gonna do something with that freedom. And now you can't. South African per capita GDP and Polish per capita GDP are just orders of magnitude different. South Africa came out of a system of racialized socialism at the same time, and we decided to our everlasting shame that we're going to try more of that, just in a slightly different direction. And the consequences were perfectly predictable. And the Free Market Foundation was there throughout it all, saying, "Hey guys, we're actually doing the wrong thing here. We could be doing much better if we just follow the Polish model, if we follow the free market model." And it has worked out smashingly well for Poland, and it has utterly crippled the back of our economy. And now, the key thing here is that it's not too late. A lot of people, kind of in our circles, they have this kind of disaster fetish. They kind of say that, oh, we are now at the point of no return, and like we're screwed now. But actually, there's no such thing as a point of no return. As I kind of alluded to, the Holodomor in Ukraine kind of decimated their population. The Great Leap Forward, so-called, in China was a massive kind of depopulation, highly genocide level kind of depopulation. And in all those countries, it always takes less than a generation after deciding that we're going to do freedom this time. It takes less than a generation to get back on your feet. And there's no example, I'm always going to say this, there is no example anywhere on this planet of a free market economy that is poor. There is not one singular example of that anywhere. So there is no point of no return. Just like Poland, we can just decide right now, right this moment, we're going to do freedom, and 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, South Africa will look radically different. And it's wonderful because we have the roadmap laid out for us there. And the Americans, thank you, the administration of Donald Trump, thank you. You have laid it out for us. You have told us very simply what to do. And I'm going to keep dunking on this guy. You also know him, Nicholas. He used to be SRC president at UCT. When you were there, he was part of a organization called Progress SA. I don't want to name his name. I don't want to shame him. But he is supposedly a classical liberal. And he, on Facebook a few days ago, said, the outrageous demands by the US. Our president and our foreign minister cannot give in to these outrageous demands. What are the demands? No BEE for American companies. Condemn the singing of genocidal songs, take rural safety seriously, and undo property confiscation laws. These are the 4 outrageous demands that the United States has laid at our feet. And I think, Nicholas, you've pointed this out before. Withdrawing the case against Israel is not one of the demands. I think it should be one of the demands, but it isn't. So the Americans would actually be happy with us to kind of carry on dragging Israel to the ICJ. So these are the outrageous demands, and this is a great start. These 4, this path, a great start that the Americans have laid out for us to choose freedom, to free our economy, and have private property rights respected in South Africa. And that's the recipe. The recipe is there, and that's how you make success.
Can you imagine if it's February this year when Ramaphosa and his gang of misfits went cap in hand to the White House? It was February, right? And can you imagine that when Trump played the clip of Malema sing Kill the Boer, if they'd actually just said, "You're right, we will actually change our weirdly unequal discrimination laws where someone can go to jail, be fined for making very minor racist comments, but yet someone can sing a genocidal chants and get away with it." And can you imagine if they actually had just realized this, rather than just begging cap in hand for Starlink for some reason? We wouldn't be in this mess. And I think that's that's my closing statement. I think there's not much more we can say. Hopefully the ANC is destroyed in next year's local elections, because that's the only way I can see us improving in the long run. David, your closing comments.
Yeah, look, I just think that we should internalize the locus of control here. I think we can't really determine, what Trump thinks. He's prone to a bit of hyperbolic rhetoric sometimes. But we can choose our response, and our response matters, and the United States matters as well. And I think you might quibble with their interpretation of our domestic affairs, but there is a problem there. There's a reality to the situation, and you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And so I think we need to find some kind of rapprochement with the United States. And I think we need to identify what are their interests, what are our interests, how can we come together to make a deal. And ultimately, Mr. Trump is a deal maker. And I think our interests are being undermined and compromised by our intransigence. And when I say our, I mean the government's intransigence. So I think we need to concede on some points. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be gained as well. If you think of the point we were making around the hunger for South African minerals, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of energy here in South Africa. We are a military and strategic location in terms of the South Atlantic, which Frans Grenier has discussed at quite a lot of length. So, and there's a lot of money to be made, a lot of opportunity, a lot of advantage to be had as well by playing nice with the Americans. And I think, that doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice all of our sovereignty. We can still be an independent country. We can still play to our interests and to our advantage. Just look at how India conducts its foreign affairs and its relationship with the United States. We can have friendly relations with multiple countries, but I don't think it's serving us to have a hostile relationship with the United States.
Exactly. And I think that's a good time to close. I think that any reasonable person can agree that we shouldn't be kicking the world superpower in the teeth. Thank you for joining us for this final episode of 2025. And we've really enjoyed having you all watching our weekly episodes. And we'll be rejoining you in January. We'll be confirming the times. And if you want to keep up, because we'll still be publishing articles, make sure to subscribe to our Substack at rationalstandard.com. Follow us on the website formerly known as Twitter, X. Follow us on Facebook. Make sure to check out the Free Market Foundation website, freemarketfoundation.com, for policy papers, for the recipe, how to fix South Africa. If you're a policymaker, if you're parliamentarian, just go onto that website, copy and paste that into a private member's bill, that will sort out the country. And last but not least, remember to, if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and please like, comment, and share this video. It's much appreciated. And until next year, I hope you have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever other holidays I'm missing out on. And most of all, a Happy New Year. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.